Chapter 2. Refilling the Well. The vessel the road had torn open was vast, and Ethan spent that first year simply learning the size of it. The old coal had been a cup filled drop by patient drop. The breakthrough had replaced the cup with a well deep, wide, and after the overdraw bone dry. Refilling it was the work of the year, and it taught Ethan, night after night, exactly how much the saving of his father had changed the scale of everything. The thin trickle of ether his own stillness produced was hopeless against the new depth. He could gather inward all night and barely wet the bottom. What filled the well slowly was the other thing, the drawing, the pulling of the world's thin ambient ether into himself through the channels the flood had carved. So every night he drew. He went still in the dark, reached out into the faint haze of the world, took hold of it in the particular way he had learned, and pulled it down into the deep dry well below his breath. Drop by drop, stream by thin cold stream, the well began, very slowly, to fill. It was slow, but it was scalable, and that was the thing that mattered. The old way had a ceiling. A cup could only hold a cup, and he had hit that wall and stalled for a year. The new way had no ceiling he could see. The well was vast, and the world's ether, thin as it was effectively endless. He was no longer limited by the size of his vessel, but only by how fast he could draw. Which meant the work was no longer holding but technique, and technique could be refined, improved, made more efficient, in a way that simple patient holding never could. For the first time, Ethan's cultivation had become a craft he could get better at, not just a vigil he could keep. So he worked at the drawing the way he worked at everything, by relentless trial in the dark. He learned that the ether came easier when he matched some inner rhythm to it, harder when he grasped. He learned to open wider channels, to pull steadier streams, to draw not just from the air right around him, but from a slowly widening sphere, gathering the thin haze from further out and funneling it in. Each refinement made the filling a little faster, still slow, still the work of years, but faster and improving, the curve bending the right way. The dry well began, week by week, to hold a shallow pool, and then a deeper one, the cold, clear ether collecting in the vast new space the breakthrough had opened. He did not rush the body, though. That was the discipline of this realm, and he was beginning to feel its shape. Tempering was not about hoarding power, but about making the body able to bear it. Draw too fast, fill too hard, and the channels, still raw from the road, scorched and ached in warning. So he held himself to a pace the body could take, refilling the well no faster than the flesh could toughen around it, learning patience of a new and more technical kind. But the better he grew at drawing, the more he came up against the lesson of the flare and the road and the watcher, the lesson that growth and exposure were the same curve. He could feel it now, in a way he hadn't before the breakthrough. A larger fire threw a larger light. He had learned that on the night the watcher turned its head. And the well filling was a larger fire every week. Each refinement of his drawing, each deeper draw, each widening of the sphere from which he gathered the world's ether, all of it made him, by inches, brighter in the dark. He had no instrument to measure his own signature, but he had the memory of the watcher's attention, and he had begun to understand the brutal arithmetic of his situation, that the very strength he needed against the tide was also the very thing that made him findable, and that he could not gather one without raising the other. It put a ceiling of a different kind on his work, not a wall in his chest, but a wall of caution. He could draw faster than he dared. He held himself well below his real capacity every night, drawing in slow, careful whispers when he could have drawn in floods, keeping his fire banked low even as the well filled. Because somewhere out past the edge of the world, the ancient attention was still turned his way, still coming, and the one thing he could not afford was to shine again the way he had on the night it found him. Grow strong and grow quiet. Both at once. Always both at once. The rule he had written years ago in the abstract was the concrete daily discipline of his cultivation now. Every draw a negotiation between the power he needed and the silence that kept him alive. He lay in the dark at the end of that first year of refilling, the well no longer dry, the body slowly toughening, the long technical craft of tempering taking shape under his hands, and took the measure of where he stood. He was weaker still, in raw terms, than he had been at his pre-road peak. A half-filled well held less than a full coal, for now. But he was on a far larger road, with no ceiling in sight, a craft he could refine instead of a vigil he could only keep. The well was filling. The body was tempering. And he was learning, draw by careful draw, to grow in the dark without shining, to bank the rising fire low enough that the thing out past the edge of the world would not find him again before he was ready to be found. It was slow. Everything worth doing in his second life was slow. But it was moving, the curve bending the right way, and Ethan Cole reached out one more time into the thin haze of the world and drew, and filled the well a little deeper and grew, quietly, carefully, one cautious whispered draw at a time, toward whatever was coming.